His suit screamed with radiation warnings as the last layer of shielding disappeared. Every breath tasted like hot metal. Beneath his trembling hands, 12 massive synchronization shafts drifted out of rhythm, each heartbeat bringing an alien empire closer to collapse, or back to perfect recovery if he lost count even once. There was no escape route left behind him. He had destroyed it himself hours earlier. All that remained was the next timing mark, and the price of reaching it. Welcome to Galactic Contact. This is the story of one ordinary combat engineer whose final mission forced an empire to confront the one weakness it never believed it had. Earth's orbital defense grid was dying one sector at a time. No dramatic breakthroughs. No desperate counteroffensives. Just a steady collapse measured in destroyed stations, silent transponders, and shrinking lines on tactical displays. Commander Sofia Alvarez stood beneath the carrier's holographic operations map without speaking. Around her, officers issued comm reports that grew worse with every update. Another defense platform had gone dark. A refugee convoy failed to report in. An entire interceptor wing vanished before reaching firing range. No one needed to say what the numbers already proved. Earth was running out of time. At the far end of the briefing room, Daniel Carter tightened the straps on a worn equipment case resting beside his chair. He wasn't a fighter pilot. He wasn't special operations. He was a combat engineer. Most of his career had been spent studying bridges, tunnels, structural failures, demolition geometry, and how damaged systems behaved under impossible conditions. That experience had finally become valuable for all the wrong reasons. The briefing room doors sealed. The tactical display shifted. The alien flagship filled the room. It dwarfed everything surrounding it. Thousands of smaller vessels maintained perfect formation around a structure so immense that parts of it disappeared beyond the projection's boundaries. No obvious reactor. No exposed command center. No convenient weakness. Only layers upon layers of redundant engineering. Sophia enlarged a cross-section recovered from years of scattered reconnaissance. Our best intelligence is incomplete, she said. But every recovered fragment agrees on one thing. The projection highlighted vast engineering districts buried deep inside the ship. Their fleet depends on this vessel. Daniel studied the internal layout. Power distribution. Structural reinforcement. Maintenance corridors. Nothing looked familiar. Nothing looked random. Sophia placed a small data module on the table. These are the latest engineering archives. Civilian infrastructure. Maintenance revisions. Partial construction records. Some of it was recovered decades apart. Daniel picked up the module. The files were inconsistent. Different survey dates. Different resolutions. Different sections of the same vessel. Someone had spent years assembling pieces that still refused to become a complete picture. One diagram held his attention longer than the others. A network of regulator assemblies stretched across multiple engineering districts. Thin timing paths connected them in repeating patterns that continued far beyond the available scans. No explanation accompanied the drawing, just measurements. He memorized the layout before closing the file. "What do you need me to destroy?" Daniel asked. Sophia met his eyes. "I don't know." Silence settled over the room. "We've targeted weapons," she continued. "Command nodes. Propulsion. Logistics. Every obvious solution failed." She tapped the engineering archive. "You're not going in with a target." She paused. "You're going in to find one." Daniel looked back at the enormous cross-section suspended above the table. Every known plan had already failed. That wasn't unusual. Engineering rarely began with certainty. It began with observation. He slid the data module into his suit. "What are my extraction options?" No one answered immediately. The hesitation was enough. Daniel nodded once. "I understand." Sophia didn't soften the truth. "A stealth shuttle will carry you through debris generated during the next fleet engagement. After that, you're alone." No speeches followed. No promises. The meeting ended exactly as military briefings often did. People stood. Orders moved. The war continued. Hours later, the carrier's launch bay glowed beneath emergency lighting. Ground crews secured Daniel's equipment inside a shuttle barely large enough for one passenger. He checked every tool himself. Cutting gear, measurement instruments, emergency charges, repair kit, life support. Nothing aboard existed to win a battle. Everything aboard existed to solve problems. The launch clamps released. The shuttle drifted into open space. Behind him, Earth's remaining defense fleet accelerated toward another engagement it could no longer expect to win. Ahead, the alien mothership eclipsed the stars. Daniel watched it grow larger through the cockpit canopy until the shuttle disappeared beneath its shadow. Ionized debris drifted past the shuttle as Daniel matched its motion to the fractured remains of a destroyed cruiser. The mothership filled every window now. Its surface wasn't smooth. Massive armored plates overlapped one another in repeating geometric layers, interrupted only by maintenance seams and recessed service ports. From a distance, the structure looked motionless. Up close, it felt alive. Tiny construction drones moved across the hull. Heat radiated through shielded sections. Entire plates shifted by fractions of an inch as internal systems adjusted beneath the armor. Daniel waited. One maintenance hatch completed its inspection cycle. Another opened farther along the hull. He fired a magnetic tether. The shuttle drifted away without correction while he crossed the gap alone. His boots struck alien metal with a dull impact. No alarms. No flashing warnings. Only the low, constant vibration of machinery far below the surface. He secured himself beside the service hatch and unpacked a compact maintenance interface assembled from human engineering tools rather than military electronics. The hatch recognized neither the hardware nor the protocol. That was expected. It recognized torque, pressure, mechanical force. After several careful adjustments, the locking assembly released one actuator at a time. The hatch opened just wide enough for a person to slip through. Daniel entered. The passage sealed behind him. Cool, filtered air replaced the silence of space. The corridor beyond was narrow and unadorned. Power conduits disappeared into reinforced bulkheads. Maintenance rails lined both walls. Directional markings repeated at precise intervals in a language he couldn't read, but the engineering logic behind them remained familiar. Systems required access. Access required order. He removed a passive navigation beacon from his pack and secured it beneath a maintenance bracket. The device transmitted nothing. It simply recorded his route for as long as it remained intact. If he never returned, the data might. He continued deeper. At the first major junction, he compared the surrounding structure with the construction archive stored inside his wrist terminal. The corridor existed. Its dimensions did not. One wall had been reinforced years after the original plans were recorded. A secondary conduit crossed through space that should have been empty. He examined the new supports without touching them. Retrofitted. Purpose unknown. He marked the discrepancy and moved on. Every undocumented change meant the archive was becoming less reliable. Every undocumented change also meant someone had solved problems here before him. Several levels above, Captain Arindra Valis stood inside a fleet security coordination center overlooking hundreds of engineering districts. Routine maintenance reports flowed across layered displays. Most required nothing more than automated approval. One report paused her attention. A maintenance hatch had completed an inspection cycle several seconds longer than expected. Insignificant by itself. She opened the accompanying diagnostics. Actuator resistance had increased briefly before returning to normal. No mechanical fault followed. No repair request appeared. She requested the drone traffic logs covering the same section. One inspection drone had altered its route by less than a meter before correcting itself. Again, insignificant. Viewed separately, she enlarged the surrounding engineering map. A maintenance corridor now showed a barely measurable pressure fluctuation. Not enough to trigger an alarm. Enough to suggest an air exchange had occurred moments after the hatch cycle. 3 anomalies. Different systems. 1 location. She dispatched the nearest patrol without changing the general security posture. If the readings meant nothing, routine personnel would confirm it. If they meant something, wider deployment could wait. Deep inside the maintenance network, Daniel reached the first isolation gate. No electronic terminal waited beside it. Instead, a mechanical locking actuator extended through the bulkhead behind a removable service panel. He studied the assembly for several seconds before selecting a narrow torque driver from his kit. The actuator resisted the first adjustment, accepted the second. The locking pins withdrew with a muted metallic click. Daniel entered before the mechanism completed its next inspection cycle. He replaced the service panel exactly as he had found it. The gate remained functional. Unauthorized access did not. Several decks away, a status indicator changed from green to amber. No alarm followed. Only a maintenance note reporting an unscheduled manual operation. Captain Irindra read the update without expression. The earlier anomalies no longer stood alone. Someone wasn't forcing entry. Someone understood how engineering systems preferred to be treated. She redirected her route toward the engineering districts. Behind the isolation gate, Daniel paused only long enough to orient himself. The corridors ahead branched deeper into the vast mechanical heart of the mothership. Somewhere beyond them lay the answer Earth had failed to find. Daniel waited until the isolation gate settled into place behind him. Then he slipped a thin steel shim into the latch assembly. It wouldn't keep security out forever. It would force the mechanism to realign before it opened again. A few extra seconds were enough. He checked the revised map on his wrist terminal, then powered the display down. From this point forward, memory would be more dependable than outdated plans. The corridor widened into a structural transfer gallery where massive support members intersected beneath armored decks. Every exposed surface served a purpose. Some carried weight. Others transferred heat or power. A slow mechanical pulse traveled through the framework beneath his boots, each cycle arriving just slightly out of step with the last. Daniel crouched beside one of the support columns. He wasn't measuring vibration. He was feeling it. The pulse traveled strongest along one reinforcement rib before fading unevenly toward the next junction. Interesting. He removed a compact ultrasonic gauge and pressed its sensor against the alloy. Waveforms returned with subtle discontinuities. Different weld composition. Additional reinforcement. The beam had been strengthened long after the ship entered service. He memorized the location before making a single brief note. Electronics could fail. Simple records rarely did. Captain Arindra Vela slowed as she entered the same engineering district. Security teams requested updated search sectors through silent data bursts. She acknowledged the requests while studying structural maintenance records instead. The intruder had crossed an unauthorized access point. Yet the projected route avoided weapons, communications, and propulsion. Every probability bent toward engineering infrastructure. She overlaid those projections onto the mothership's original construction archive. A pattern emerged. The intruder wasn't following corridors. He was following structural hierarchy. She adjusted her own route. Several patrol teams continued searching empty compartments because they were protecting strategic assets instead of engineering logic. She left them in place. Correcting every deployment too early would tighten the search pattern without making it more accurate. Daniel reached a junction where 6 primary braces converged around a suspended load transfer frame. He unpacked a programmable shaped charge and secured it against the least reinforced section of a secondary brace. Not the strongest member. Not the weakest. The one most likely to reveal how neighboring supports carried additional load. He checked the geometry twice before stepping behind a maintenance barrier. The explosion cracked through the gallery with a flat, controlled concussion. The targeted brace fractured exactly along the predicted stress line. Above him, suspended support assemblies shifted their weight into adjacent members. Hydraulic dampers responded in staggered order. Massive joints flexed, settled, and accepted new loads without catastrophic failure. Daniel ignored the damaged brace. His attention stayed on the redistribution sequence. It lasted less than 4 seconds. Long enough. He recorded only the timing. One shaped charge was gone. He packed the empty case and moved immediately. The structural response reached Irindra before the sound itself. Her visor displayed changing load vectors racing through nearby support frames. By the time she entered the gallery, emergency stabilization had already finished. The fractured brace drew little interest. The surrounding supports did. A maintenance drone hovered nearby, projecting engineering diagnostics across the damaged framework. She reviewed its log. The explosive yield had been carefully limited. Enough to force structural redistribution, not enough to threaten the compartment. The conclusion arrived without certainty, but it changed the pursuit. The intruder wasn't simply destroying infrastructure. He was asking the ship questions. Professional confidence gave way to careful analysis. Understanding the next experiment might prove faster than chasing the last known position. Daniel entered another service corridor where the vibration almost disappeared. The silence carried its own information. Major structural loads had shifted elsewhere after the controlled fracture. He continued forward. The ship had answered with mathematics. Ahead, A sealed engineering bulkhead blocked the next district. Daniel rested one hand against the cold composite surface and listened through it. Beyond the barrier, countless mechanisms operated with astonishing precision. Their rhythms weren't identical. They overlapped in carefully offset patterns. He couldn't explain the behavior yet. He didn't need to. Finding the reason had already become more important than carrying out the original plan. The engineering bulkhead admitted Daniel into the first synchronization chamber after 3 careful minutes with improvised maintenance tools. There was no towering reactor, no single point of failure. Dozens of cylindrical regulator towers stood in concentric circles beneath a ceiling woven with timing conduits. Thin streams of energized plasma moved through transparent transfer channels. Each regulator exchanged load with its neighbors according to a rhythm too subtle to recognize at first glance. Daniel stayed where he was, watching. The notebook remained inside his harness. The regulators never transferred energy at the same instant. One accepted surplus. Another released it. A third waited. The sequence repeated with microscopic variation. He removed his last calibrated demolition package. If the engineering archive contained one correct assumption, this chamber would reveal it. He measured the mounting angle twice, confirmed the surrounding geometry, and secured the charge against a structural transfer collar linking several timing conduits. The detonator armed. He stepped behind reinforced shielding. A dull impact rolled through the chamber. Transfer conduits shuddered. Diagnostic indicators flashed amber across multiple regulator towers. Daniel leaned forward. The first timing deviation appeared exactly where he expected. A neighboring regulator compensated. Then another. The correction spread through the chamber like a carefully ordered relay. Every delayed transfer became another regulator's responsibility. Within seconds, the disturbed sequence settled into perfect stability. No overload. No cascade. No structural failure. The chamber behaved as though it had rehearsed disruption countless times. Daniel replayed the captured telemetry in silence. The explosive had worked exactly as designed. His hypothesis had not. He compared the new measurements with the redistribution timings collected from the fractured support brace. Different systems. The same behavior. Recovery traveled through ordered delay instead of simultaneous correction. He replayed both datasets once more. Then he powered the recorder down. One observation wasn't enough. He needed another. Captain Arindra Valis entered the damaged synchronization chamber after engineering crews confirmed local stability. No emergency teams rushed inside. They had learned from the earlier incident. She examined the transfer collar where the explosive had been placed. The location reflected careful calculation. The result reflected incomplete understanding. Nearby maintenance diagnostics replayed the regulator response one cycle at a time. She watched the correction sequence twice. On the third pass, she slowed the visualization. Each regulator waited before accepting responsibility from its neighbor. Intentional delay, not hesitation. Design. The intruder had identified the correct system. He had simply challenged the wrong principle. Her communicator received a brief operational summary from High Marshal Kaler. Containment authority expanded. Engineering districts would be isolated in stages. Civilian maintenance would be postponed wherever practical. No explanation accompanied the directive. None was necessary. The order reflected established doctrine, not panic. She acknowledged the update and left the chamber. Daniel abandoned the main engineering corridors marked on his original route. The failed experiment had stripped away confidence in every remaining prediction. Each conclusion would have to be earned separately. A narrow inspection crawlspace led toward another relay sector. Halfway through, he paused beside a maintenance access niche where timing conduits disappeared into the surrounding bulkhead. He placed 2 fingers against the insulated housing. One vibration arrived first. Another followed a heartbeat later. The pattern repeated. Small. Consistent. He committed the sequence to memory and continued. Recovery wasn't instantaneous. It traveled. Travel required time. Time could be measured. The realization didn't solve the mission. It erased the old solution. Ahead, deeper maintenance sectors waited beyond another chain of manual service routes, where every answer would have to be earned before any final decision could be made. Daniel emerged from the inspection crawlspace into a service exchange suspended above 3 active engineering levels. The compartment had changed since the construction archive was assembled. Additional synchronization modules occupied one side of the bay. Autonomous lifting frames carried sealed regulator assemblies toward waiting maintenance crews. Diagnostic beacons pulsed in carefully staggered intervals, guiding equipment through intersecting traffic without collision. Daniel remained behind the service lattice and watched. Not the machines, the technicians directing them. They waited for precise timing windows before crossing transport lanes. Every movement followed the synchronization schedule instead of simple convenience. His planned route passed directly through the center of the exchange. It also crossed the busiest maintenance zone he had seen since boarding. A young apprentice hurried across the platform, carrying calibration tools almost too large to handle, while two senior engineers adjusted traffic timing to let the apprentice pass. Daniel erased the route from memory. A longer maintenance shaft branched away beneath the platform. It added nearly 20 minutes. He took it without hesitation. High Marshal Kaler studied the latest engineering reports aboard the command bridge as revised containment measures spread throughout the vessel. No catastrophic failures. No uncontrolled energy release. Only deliberate intrusion followed by increasingly accurate reconnaissance. A senior operations officer expanded the projected movement overlays. The intruder is avoiding populated engineering sectors. Another officer dismissed the observation. Coincidence. Kaler enlarged the previous route projections himself. Every deviation aligned with occupied work districts after the containment measures had begun. He is adapting to our own responses. The bridge fell silent. Kaler issued the next authorization. Restrict civilian maintenance to designated corridors. Compress engineering access. Preserve synchronization readiness. The order spread through thousands of internal systems. Lighting schedules changed. Equipment priorities shifted. Transit routes narrowed. No district stopped functioning. Every district became less flexible. Daniel noticed the consequences before he confirmed them. Service lifts paused longer between cycles. Maintenance indicators redirected foot traffic toward newly assigned corridors. Even the rhythm of equipment movement had changed. Containment wasn't simply searching for him. It was reshaping the ship. He climbed through an auxiliary conduit overlooking another relay station. The maintenance traffic below had nearly vanished. Only essential crews remained. His detour now passed through infrastructure carrying fewer people because command had concentrated them elsewhere. Captain Arindra Valis reviewed the revised containment map while standing inside a synchronization logistics center that had been emptied only moments earlier. Engineering teams had already departed under Kaler's directive. Only autonomous equipment remained. She compared civilian relocation schedules against reconstructed estimates of the intruder's movement. A consistent pattern emerged. Each time occupied sectors shifted, the projected route shifted away from them. Not after contact. Before contact, she canceled one pending corridor closure. The adjustment redirected maintenance personnel through an alternate logistics route while leaving the security perimeter unchanged. Engineering headquarters accepted the modification as traffic optimization. The change required no explanation. One more occupied passage disappeared from the intruder's likely route. Daniel reached a compact synchronization relay station concealed behind thermal shielding panels. The maintenance interface rejected every request for internal records. He expected that. Instead of forcing access, he connected passive timing probes to exposed calibration contacts. No protected data crossed the link. Only electrical rhythm. Wave after wave repeated through the relay network. One correction reached a neighboring channel. Another arrived moments later. The sequence matched every observation he had gathered since the fractured support brace. Structural redistribution. Regulator recovery. Relay timing. Each belonged to a different system. Each pointed toward the same limitation. Information required travel. Travel required measurable delay. He drew a single line through every remaining demolition plan. Beneath it, he sketched a new objective. The manual synchronization nexus, where every timing path ultimately converged. The route ahead became longer. The margin for error became almost non-existent. Daniel folded the notebook and secured it inside his harness. Everything written there had become evidence instead of instruction. The maintenance shaft descended toward the synchronization spine through spaces no longer meant for routine access. Protective panels had been removed over decades of servicing, exposing insulated timing trunks secured by heavy mechanical brackets. Thin arcs of ionized air shimmered across field stabilizers whenever a synchronization cycle completed, then vanished before the next sequence began. He wasn't searching for weaknesses anymore. He was searching for convergence. At the next junction, he stopped beneath 3 independent timing conduits feeding the same armored manifold. One correction pulse reached the housing. A second followed. The third always arrived last. He checked the intervals against his watch. The pattern repeated. He committed the cadence to memory and moved on without writing it down. Across the vessel, revised containment orders continued reshaping ordinary life. Maintenance rotations grew shorter. Non-essential diagnostics disappeared from work schedules. Entire engineering districts surrendered flexibility to preserve synchronization readiness. Captain Arindra Valis studied the operational consequences instead of the tactical map. Every restriction protected the ship. Every restriction also revealed which systems Imperial Command considered indispensable. The realization arrived too late to reverse without creating even greater disruption. She canceled 2 additional corridor closures before they took effect. Engineering headquarters accepted the revisions automatically because they reduced congestion around active regulator maintenance. Security coverage remained intact. Civilian movement changed. The compromise satisfied neither objective completely. Daniel reached a vertical service trunk stretching hundreds of feet through the synchronization spine. Powered lifts had already been disabled under containment authority. He climbed using inspection brackets welded into the inner wall. Halfway up, one glove slipped across polished composite worn smooth by generations of technicians. His forearm struck the edge of a mounting flange. An old scar beneath his sleeve opened again. The suit sealed the abrasion immediately. A warning icon appeared. Outer layer compromised. Life support integrity remained stable. He tightened an external restraint strap around the damaged sleeve and resumed climbing. The delay cost him time. Ignoring the damage would have cost him mobility later. At the top of the shaft, an actuator gallery stretched into the distance beneath rows of synchronized mechanical drives. No electronic controllers governed the final timing transfer here. Steel shafts, reduction gears, hydraulic governors. Every mechanism transmitted calibration physically toward the heart of the vessel. Daniel rested beside one drive assembly and listened. Valve groups engaged in a repeating order. Each sequence arrived slightly offset from the last. The delay matched the relay measurements collected below. Another independent confirmation. He disconnected the compact structural scanner from his harness and removed its standardized maintenance power connector. The scanner itself went into an empty service locker. The connector stayed with him. High Marshal Kaler reviewed the latest engineering assessment aboard the command carrier. The intruder continues advancing. He abandoned demolition. An analyst replied while expanding projected movement corridors. He abandoned the first solution. Kaler shifted his attention to synchronization access doctrine. All remaining approaches require manual servicing. They do. Maintain automated response. Reduce personnel exposure. The revised order propagated immediately. Inspection drones detached from charging alcoves throughout the lower engineering sectors, replacing security teams wherever confined infrastructure limited safe movement. No officer questioned the decision. Machines consumed fewer resources. They also left clearer evidence. The first drone appeared as Daniel entered a narrow regulator access gallery. It drifted silently between timing housings, sweeping conductive surfaces with overlapping electromagnetic pulses. He switched off his work light before the beam reached the intersection. Darkness changed nothing. The sensors ignored visible light. Their search pattern focused on energized equipment. The discarded scanner no longer mattered. The standardized connector in his pocket did. Its conductive braid reflected a brief pulse across the gallery wall. Daniel eased the connector free, looped the cable around an exposed maintenance rail, and pulled. The braid brushed a live calibration contact. A burst of electromagnetic interference rippled through the confined space. The drone pivoted instantly toward the false anomaly. 2 more units altered course to assist. While their sensors converged on the interference source, Daniel slipped through a manually latched inspection hatch on the opposite side and secured it from within using a maintenance pin. The distraction lasted only a few seconds. It was enough. Captain Arindra arrived after the drones completed their search. A scorched maintenance rail. An abandoned standardized connector fused at one end. No damaged synchronization equipment. No human. She reviewed the drone's recovery logs. The interference had been created deliberately with expendable hardware. Another tool exchanged for distance. Another choice narrowing the path ahead. Beyond the sealed inspection hatch, every remaining maintenance route converged toward the manual synchronization nexus. There would be no wider network beyond it. Only decisions whose consequences could no longer be reversed. The inspection hatch opened into a circular service vestibule no larger than a freight elevator. Every passage beyond it narrowed. Daniel studied the maintenance schematic etched into the bulkhead instead of the locked doors surrounding him. The diagram wasn't classified. It didn't need to be. Anyone who reached this point had already crossed layers of engineering safeguards that almost no one ever saw. Every remaining route converged on a single destination, the manual synchronization nexus. His original mission had failed because it depended on overwhelming a system built to recover. That assumption had carried him this far. It would carry him no farther. He unpacked the last tool capable of cutting hardened alloy and removed the service lock cover from the nearest emergency release. The mechanism had never been designed for repeated operation. Metal shavings collected beneath the access shaft as he turned the drive by hand. The lock disengaged. He squeezed through the opening. Before moving on, he withdrew the improvised drive key. The emergency gearbox snapped backward under stored mechanical tension, twisting the shaft beyond repair. The route sealed itself permanently. There would be no way back through it. He accepted the consequence and continued. Captain Irreversible reached the ruined service lock less than 5 minutes later. Fragments of the broken drive key remained lodged inside the gearbox. Engineering telemetry reconstructed the sequence almost immediately. Manual override. Emergency release. Catastrophic actuator failure. Intentional. She requested updated access projections. Only one remaining path still connected to the manual synchronization nexus. Security officers gathered behind her while automated tactical overlays proposed increasingly aggressive containment options. The lead officer highlighted the remaining approach. We can force the inner blast partitions closed. Irindra examined the engineering advisory attached to the recommendation. The manual partitions surrounded the synchronization shaft to isolate mechanical timing systems during maintenance. Closing them under load could damage synchronization drives that couldn't be recalibrated remotely. Containment would improve. Synchronization readiness would not. The regulation had existed long before the war. She dismissed the recommendation. Instead, she stepped to the local maintenance console and entered her command credentials. Authorization accepted. A permanent engineering record appeared before the controls unlocked. Every manual operation would be archived automatically. She selected the lower inspection partition leading toward the synchronization shaft. The massive barrier rolled aside. Another prompt appeared. Command authorization recorded. She confirmed it. The timestamp entered the ship's permanent engineering archive. The security officers noticed the confirmation, but no one objected. The regulation allowed the action. The responsibility belonged entirely to the officer whose authorization now surrounded the open passage. Daniel entered the lower synchronization shaft moments before the partition finished moving. The timing couldn't be ignored. Neither could it be explained. The shaft descended in a slow spiral around massive mechanical linkages carrying calibration forces toward the heart of the vessel. With every turn, the separate rhythms beneath his boots blended more closely together. He counted intervals instead of steps. When the final pattern repeated exactly, he stopped beside a maintenance platform overlooking the Nexus control chamber. Below, concentric timing assemblies rotated with relentless precision. There were no exposed reactors, no vulnerable control center, only machinery performing exactly as designed. The notebook remained inside his harness. He no longer needed to open it. Captain Irreversible remained beside the open partition as the security teams advanced. Their tactical network updated automatically. Manual barrier opened by Captain Irreversible. The authorization propagated into the fleet's permanent engineering records. It could not be withdrawn. She looked once at the archived entry, then followed the security teams deeper toward the synchronization nexus. The maintenance platform ended at a circular control chamber wrapped around the manual synchronization nexus. Nothing about it resembled a weapon. 12 mechanical synchronization shafts entered from different directions. Each one terminated in a heavily shielded timing clutch connected to a central governor assembly. Hydraulic accumulators lined the outer wall. Manual engagement levers stood beside every clutch, positioned so technicians could isolate or resynchronize individual timing paths during catastrophic failures. Every movement required human hands. Every correction required someone to remain inside the chamber. Daniel descended the final ladder. The standardized maintenance connector salvage from his discarded scanner fit the engineering interface exactly as intended. No privileged access appeared. Only engineering status. Synchronization phase offsets. Mechanical engagement states. Emergency operating procedures. It was enough. He compared the displayed timing sequence with the cadence committed to memory during the climb. The final confirmation arrived. Every regulator recovered because this room never allowed the network to drift beyond measurable delay. Destroying individual regulators had never threatened the system. Interrupting the manual synchronization sequence would. Only while the interruption was maintained. Daniel disconnected the cable. No additional information mattered. Captain Arindra Valis reached the upper observation gallery overlooking the Nexus. Security teams spread across reinforced firing positions without entering the chamber. Engineering doctrine prohibited uncontrolled weapons fire around exposed synchronization drives. The restriction protected the ship first, the intruder second. The tactical commander requested authorization for a precision shot through the maintenance opening. A warning immediately covered the firing solution. Risk of permanent synchronization damage exceeds permitted threshold. He recalculated. The warning remained. No one lowered a weapon. No one fired. The machinery beneath them imposed limits that rank could not erase. Irindra watched Daniel cross the chamber below. She transmitted a single order. Contain every exit. Security units repositioned. The chamber became a closed circle. Daniel stopped beside the central governor. A mechanical emergency procedure was engraved directly into the housing. Loss of external power. Manual synchronization. Continuous operator presence required. Estimated radiation exposure exceeded maintenance limits because shielding panels remained open during emergency operation. He looked once toward the sealed exits. There was no route through them. He had ended that possibility himself hours earlier. He opened the emergency service compartment built into his armor. The compact reactor supplying the suit hummed steadily beneath layered shielding. Removing it would end life support. Leaving it in place would end the mission. His hands moved with practiced precision. Power feeds, thermal couplings, mechanical locks. Warning indicators spread across the visor. Environmental regulation lost. Reserve oxygen declining. Radiation shielding reduced. He pulled the reactor free. Its emergency engineering connector locked into the manual synchronization power socket beside the governor. The chamber lights dimmed. The governor accepted auxiliary power. Manual mode engaged. Mechanical clutches disengaged from automatic timing one by one. Daniel gripped the first engagement lever. He waited, counted, pulled. Steel teeth slammed together. The second timing shaft reached its offset. He drove another lever into position. The platform trembled beneath his boots. The vibration spread through the governor housing and into his arms. Each sequence depended on the one before it. Missing a single interval would restore automatic synchronization. Maintaining every interval demanded constant control. The reactor warning shifted from amber to crimson. Radiation flooded the unshielded chamber around him. His breathing grew shorter as the suit lost environmental control. His gloves slipped against the vibrating steel. He tightened his grip and held the timing. Above him, engineering telemetry changed faster than tactical displays. Synchronization variants spread outward through the vessel. Not because equipment failed, because every correction now arrived late. The delays accumulated instead of canceling. One regulator waited for another already waiting elsewhere. Load transfers hesitated. Mechanical governors searched for timing that no longer existed. A senior engineering officer stared at the cascading reports. The lattice is losing phase. Another reached for emergency recovery protocols. There isn't an automatic recovery. Manual synchronization required the chamber below. Occupied. Daniel forced himself through the next sequence. The resistance increased with every engagement. Hydraulic pressure pushed back against each lever. His shoulders shook with the effort. The governor vibrated harder beneath both hands. The final synchronization clutch reached its mark. He pulled. Metal locked against metal. For a single instant, every rotating assembly aligned. Then the accumulated delays collided. Across the vessel, synchronization paths slipped beyond allowable tolerance. Protective systems isolated entire regulator groups. Energy transfers stopped arriving in sequence. The distributed recovery network fractured into independent sections that could no longer agree on a common phase. The first structural tremor rolled through the chamber. Hydraulic accumulators vented automatically. Warning sirens replaced ordinary engineering tones. Status displays across the observation gallery filled with emergency isolation orders faster than crews could acknowledge them. Security teams withdrew from their firing positions as compartment integrity alarms activated around the nexus. Procedure moved them, not fear. Irindra remained where she stood for one heartbeat longer. Below, Daniel still held the governor assembly with both hands. He never looked toward the exits. His eyes stayed fixed on the timing indicators until the chamber lights failed. Emergency illumination flickered once, then vanished as synchronization across the mothership finally collapsed. The first synchronization failures never reached the bridge. Communication trunks drifted out of phase before command channels could stabilize. Fleet coordination dissolved into isolated fragments as each regulator cluster searched for timing references that no longer agreed. Outside the mothership, Imperial escorts reacted independently. Some advanced, others withdrew. Several held formation, waiting for confirmations that never came. The human defensive line saw only one unmistakable change. The largest vessel in the invasion fleet had stopped behaving like a single ship. Commander Sofia Alvarez watched the sensor wall update faster than anyone could interpret it. The enormous energy signature at the center of the battlefield fractured into dozens of independent synchronization envelopes. No coordinated firing solution. No one celebrated. The opening existed. No one knew how long it would last. Human task groups accelerated toward it. Inside the mothership, emergency isolation systems worked exactly as designed. Entire engineering districts sealed themselves from neighboring sections. Atmosphere vanished from some compartments. Others remained intact. Bulkheads held. The distributed architecture continued preserving as much of the vessel as possible. It could no longer preserve the whole. Structural failures appeared wherever isolated synchronization groups reached incompatible operating states. Massive load-bearing assemblies expanded unevenly. Rotating transfer systems locked against one another. Sections of the hull tore apart under stresses no single engineer had ever intended them to carry. The destruction spread through accumulated consequence rather than explosion. Captain Irindra Velas evacuated with the last surviving security personnel from the observation gallery before the collapsing synchronization shaft cut off the chamber forever. Engineering blast doors sealed automatically behind the retreat. Manual override disappeared with them. She reached an emergency command station 2 decks above and requested immediate recovery access to the Nexus. The response arrived almost instantly. Impossible. Radiation exceeded emergency maintenance limits. Structural continuity no longer existed between surviving compartments. No certified recovery route remained. She read the assessment twice. Then she looked back toward the dead engineering district. No recovery protocol remained. The realization settled without protest. She closed the report and turned away. The Imperial fleet abandoned the damaged flagship one formation after another. Not from panic, from arithmetic. Escort commanders no longer possessed a functioning command network capable of coordinating defensive coverage around a vessel that could neither maneuver nor synchronize its own systems. Withdrawal orders spread locally. Each surviving formation protected whatever ships still answered. The human fleet followed, not to destroy every retreating vessel, to force distance before another command structure could emerge. The battle ended without triumphal broadcasts. Only exhausted confirmations that Earth still possessed a future in which another battle might be fought. Months later, recovery operations continued inside the drifting remains of the mothership. Imperial engineering teams entered compartment after compartment that had remained inaccessible since the collapse. Most discoveries were predictable. Collapsed shafts, distorted regulators, abandoned maintenance equipment. The manual synchronization nexus required weeks to reach. Radiation levels had fallen enough for limited entry. The governor assembly still stood where emergency procedures required it. Its mechanical engagement levers remained locked in manual position. Connected to the auxiliary power socket rested the compact reactor from a human combat suit. The reactor had exhausted itself long before recovery crews arrived. No human remains waited beside it. The chamber itself had not survived intact. Only the control assembly endured. An engineering officer documented every connection before ordering the reactor removed without alteration. Nothing in the report required speculation. The sequence explained itself. The tribunal convened after fleet reconstruction began. Captain Irreversible stood before officers who had never seen the synchronization chamber. They did not accuse her of destroying the mothership. Engineering evidence had already settled that question. The permanent archive displayed a different decision. Manual inspection partition opened under the authorization of Captain Irreversible. Timestamp. Authentication. Engineering record. Unaltered. Her authorization had allowed an enemy combatant to reach the manual synchronization nexus. Intent did not erase consequence. Operational judgment did not erase procedure. The verdict required no raised voices. Failure of command responsibility. Removal from operational service. Permanent exile from fleet command. She accepted the sentence exactly as it was read. No appeal followed. Years later, human engineering academies studied fragments recovered from the battlefield. Not as trophies, as technical evidence. The distributed synchronization architecture became required study for every officer expected to understand that even the strongest system remained bound by measurable limits. Daniel Carter's mission file remained incomplete. Official records listed him as missing in action. No recovered evidence contradicted that conclusion. Commander Sofia Alvarez closed the archive after reading the final engineering report. There were no recorded last words. No final transmission. Only measurements. Only decisions that had been carried through to their end. Far beyond Earth, repair crews continued rebuilding an empire that now understood a different kind of opponent. Not one with greater weapons. Not one with superior numbers. One willing to abandon a failed plan, learn faster than the system opposing it, and keep working after every familiar solution had disappeared. That lesson remained embedded in every surviving fragment of the fallen mothership. The wreckage could be dismantled. The evidence could not. Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. If you had been in Captain Arindra's place, would you have followed procedure or made the same irreversible choice? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Galactic Contact for more stories waiting beyond the stars.